We was robbed. Today it's in the 50s, and we lost our warmer temperatures. But it's not terrible, although there is a 18-mile-an-hour wind that I don't feel right at this moment. And when I walk amidst the trees, that helps cut back on it somewhat. And it's kind of overcast and partly sunny. So that's the weather report. This is the Jeffersonian section, although he did it in more detail with his little instruments that he had all over his home. So what's the news today? In the background, occasionally, I've been listening to the trial of Murdoch because he was on the witness stand. And I have several observations as a guy who's been kicking around courtrooms for a long time. And the first one is, how do you conduct a cross-examination? And the principle for a cross-examination of an adverse party, in this case the prosecution questioning the defendant, is that you can ask leading questions. You know, isn't it a fact that you killed your wife and son on blankety blank day? And the answer you'd probably get would be no in this case, but that's a leading question. It contains all the facts necessary to make out a declarative accusation, and you're trying to push someone to admit to your characterization of what happened. Now, a good friend of mine, Larry Posner, a terrific trial lawyer, he's written a book on cross-examination, and it's a fabulous book. It's very good, and it's very good even for people who do it, because you're kind of retraining yourself. So I'm a big fan of Larry's book. But the very first part of his book, and all through his teachings, is the fact that when you can ask a leading question, that's what you ask. Okay, so what other kind of questions could you ask? You could ask a direct question. What did you do on the night your wife and son were killed? That's an open question. The person can go on for hours. But instead you could say, isn't it a fact you went and turned over your son's body? Yes or no? Yes. And you can ask that question because he did do that. Isn't it a fact that your son had enormous amounts of blood from the incident that killed him? Yes or no? Yes. Isn't it a fact that there was not a drop of blood on any of your clothing? Yes or no? No, there wasn't any. Okay. Isn't it a fact that you took a shower the day that your son was killed? Yes. Now, there's a question of when he took it, did he take it afterwards, and so forth. But you get the idea. You ask leading questions, and you control the witness, and you don't permit him to go off on a jaunt. Now, I do not prefer to put my client on the stand in a civil or criminal case. And sometimes it's necessary, and there is a question about the capability of a person who's so involved and so emotional and doesn't have experience talking before groups, appearing in his own behalf. And usually there are other ways to prove these things. So the biggest question in a criminal case is that you may get to ask questions about other things. And you may give the jury the feeling, because your client confirms some things, that he did other things. Now, I don't have a view whether he did it or not, but there's the biggest problem in the case of Murdoch is that he changed his story about being with his wife and son at nearby kennels when before he said that hadn't happened, or at least that's my understanding, and those of you who are following it can know whether that's true or not. But there is a discrepancy between what he told them the other day in court, I believe just yesterday. So the prosecutor continued to ask direct questions. What did you do about this? What did you do about that? And it allowed Murdoch to go on for extended periods of time. And I think one of the biggest things that Murdoch accomplished was, and I didn't see it because I had it on and was listening to it, when he was talking about his wife deceased and his son deceased, he got very emotional. It's very believable. Now, The man is a trial lawyer, and he probably violated one of the first rules of how to handle accusations against yourself when you're answering them, which is the lady doth protest too much, methinks. He went on. But he managed to maintain a respect for his inquisitor. And he might raise his voice slightly, but he was very careful what he did. And his family is prominent in the community. So I can't say that I have an idea what's going to happen. And perhaps he and his lawyers thought he should take the stand because that was the only way he could explain that change of heart about the facts of the case. And so there was a way to ask questions that would have, it seemed to me, pinned him to the wall. But I don't think the prosecutor has that skill. So what would the outcome be? I don't know. I'm curious. And I haven't watched it enough to say these series of events make a difference. You may have heard me before say that in every political campaign, trial, personal series of events, there's a magic moment that sums it all up. And it could be that the magic moment was when he changed his story. It could be the magic moment was when they saw him cry, believably, at the death of his wife and of his son, who was 22, and his wife was in her 50s. But there's more. I don't know how the prosecution apparently was able to get in the fact that this guy also stole from his firm something like $800,000. That he was involved in a car crash, that he used drugs. And I wonder if some or all of those things would have been kept out had he not taken the witness stand. And I'm not sure they go to his credibility. And I don't think he's been convicted of anything having to do with cheating his law firm. So there are messy things going on in the courtroom. And people think, anything goes in court, too much TV trials, but it's not true. Of course, it can go wrong because the judge does the wrong things. So, for those of you who are playing court buff and following it closely, maybe a couple of things I said will help you look for what's going on. But the high point of the trial is usually when the defendant takes the stand. And I think that's at an end, or will be at an end, certainly by the time you hear this. Now, what else is going on? Because I had that on in the background, I heard a host of a show ask a foreign affairs expert about Putin's crimes. And then the question, and this is striking, will Putin be held accountable for what he's done in Ukraine? Now, doesn't it just scream at you that we ask if Putin's going to be held accountable in the kind of, less predictable, unstructured manner by which one ends up at the World Court, when our nation is not held accountable, a guy that tried to overthrow our own government. So we ask questions about what's going to happen to Putin. Well, what's going to happen to Trump? And if I were to take a measuring index of people who get back to me on social media or in person, it is increasingly, as time passes, our citizens believe nothing will ever happen to Trump. Who knows, he may actually get elected again because we treat these people in such a ridiculous fashion. And let's see, shifting gears, another thing that concerns us all is Social Security and Medicare. Now, some may think this battle is over because of how Trump handled the State of the Union and put the Republican Party on its heels, and saying some of you guys are for cutting back on Social Security. Now, there's a story today that's been going on for some time, and it is, should we increase how much is the tax on your income for Social Security? And they say they want to do it for the wealthy. Now, right now, you have funds taken out of your income up to $160,000. And then that's it. There's a percentage. So, Sanders had an aggressive proposal, of course, and there have been a couple of figures cited. One is, let's increase it to $250,000. That would put money into the system, and so Social Security would last longer. Biden's is in a squeeze if he were to accept that, because he said when he ran for president that he wouldn't increase the taxes for anyone under $400,000. So he would increase the taxes if he did it for those over $400,000 and not below that amount. Well, that's interesting. So I guess you go to $160,000 and then there are no taxes until $400,000. I don't know they're going to do any of it. And the word among Democrats is we're not going to do that. We're not going to touch Social Security or Medicare. Talk about a group of guys that can mess up an issue, and you give all these favors to the truly wealthy. I mean, the billionaires, the gazillionaires, and we chase after wage earners. And what about people who invest in those kinds of things? That's what's interesting. And then I think there's an interesting local story, or sort of local, depends on how avid a sports follower you are. Washington, D.C. has a team once called the Redskins, now called the Commanders. Now, if that isn't a terrible name. And Jeff Bezos has investors looking into taking over the team, the Commanders, and putting his own imprint on it. I just can't imagine the headache watching sports would be for somebody who really likes sports by owning a team. But I don't know. I guess you have so much money, you don't know what to do with it. And if the team is making money and winning games, I guess there's a profit incentive. But there it is. So I think if he does get it, or anybody else gets it, change the damn name. I think they should call it the Wild Men, or the Sucker Punch. Something. Commanders. Ouch. How did they come up with that? It was artificial intelligence came up with that name. So I see that there's a nice blue behind me. Isn't that beautiful? So that's all I got today. And so I speak to you from my cathedral of trees, which is getting little green sprouts here and there, and that's exciting. And I'm waiting for it to get warm again like it was yesterday. Bye-bye.